Hey, welcome back. Today we're talking about monomyth, or the hero's journey. And it's a way of looking at literature which explores how all stories really seem to follow the same patterns and tell the same sort of tales. If you go all the way back to ancient mythologies and legends, you'll see the same patterns that still show up in modern epics. Why is that so? Perhaps it comes from a natural human way of understanding the world around us and understanding our experience with the world. This approach to looking at literature was made popular by a man named Joseph Campbell in his book Hero with 1,000 Faces, which was published in the 1940s. It certainly creates an interesting framework for us to study stories from the past and the present. There have been many variations and discussions of Campbell, but I'm going to hit his major points in the journey and then leave it for you to play around with. So in looking at the stories from the past and the present, Campbell noticed that heroes followed certain patterns. There were a certain series of steps that showed up in almost every story. There were, of course, variations, and certain steps were sometimes abbreviated or skipped, but for the most part, there was a structure. All of these have to do with the concept of a journey, and this idea certainly does work very well for stories about heroes who go on journeys. If you think of Star Wars, which was actually heavily influenced by Campbell, or Lord of the Rings, or The Hobbit, or any number of other stories where a character is in his own mundane life and then is pulled out of it and sent out to do something. But even if the hero doesn't really go anywhere, sometimes a hero can be pulled out of his comfort zone by events around him and then have to find a way to respond to them in an appropriate way. It can still follow the pattern. Campbell's materials are very interesting and worth reading. In short, he divides the journey into 3 parts. The first is called the departure. These are the steps of the departure. Step 1. Call to adventure. In this step, the hero is in his everyday mundane life, and all of a sudden something happens that summons him out of his life and into an adventure. In the case of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, it might be the droids who fall out of the sky and then summon him into a wild adventure. With Frodo, it's the discovery that the ring that his uncle bequeathed him has certain powers and needs to be dealt with. In the second step of the departure, oftentimes the hero will refuse the call. After all, he's comfortable in his everyday life, and stepping out into that wild world of adventure is a little bit unnerving. This one doesn't happen every time, but it certainly does happen frequently. There will often be a moment of hesitation, if not downright refusal. Luke says, "I can't go, I've got to help my family on the farm." Frodo hems and haws and delays, at least in the book version, and it's not till things get really hot that he has to get up and go. Step 3 in the departure is called supernatural aid. Since our hero might be hesitant to go on the journey, oftentimes he's given a supernatural push to go that direction. This frequently comes in the form of an old mage-like character, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Gandalf, or many other figures like that. And oftentimes this mage character gives our hero some sort of supernatural weapon or tool that will help them in their journey. Frodo receives not only a special heirloom sword, but also some chainmail that's really special and valuable. Not to mention the ring that he's been carrying around. Luke Skywalker gets his father's lightsaber. And so many other heroes are given something special to get them going. At this point, I often like to point out that there's also a gathering of companions. Although it's not a separate step in Campbell, I like to note it here. At this point, the hero often picks up some sidekicks to help him go on the way. With Frodo, it's Samwise Gamgee. Luke gets Han and Chewbacca, not to mention the droids, and they set out in company. These companions are characters who have skills that will be of aid to the main character and support him or her on the way. So after receiving the call, after maybe refusing the call, after getting that extra supernatural push, we come to step 4, which is crossing the first threshold. A threshold is the place in a doorway, which marks the difference between one place and another. Stepping over a threshold can have deep symbolic value. It means you're no longer in the place you were before, and now you're in a new place. For the hero, stepping outside of his world of comforts is a big deal. There's a wonderful moment in Lord of the Rings when Sam pauses in the middle of a field and realizes that if he takes one more step, he's going to have gone farther than he's ever been before from his home. And although there's really not that much difference in the previous step and this step, it still feels different because he's somewhere new. And that brings us to step 5 of departure, which is called the belly of the whale. This is not the moment that we enter the world of the quest, but the moment that we realize the difference between the world of the quest and our own world. It's the first major conflict that the hero experiences, or the first moment that the hero feels definitely out of his depth. Usually the hero founders pretty horribly at this point, and has to be rescued by an outside force. It's an awful pit of despair where the hero really faces challenges that he doesn't know what to do with, and he begins to really long for home for the first time. And so ends the first part of the journey, departure. The second part of journey is called initiation. Initiation is a word that has to do with being changed and transformed and turned into something new. Instead of being the same old mundane person, he's becoming the hero. The first step in this part of the story is the road of trials. This is a really broad step, which encompasses often the majority of the story. Pretty much everything from the beginning to the end of the story are trials, getting the hero towards that big end. Whether Luke's shooting down TIE fighters or Frodo's dodging trolls, it's all trials. But it gives the hero opportunity to grow and to become stronger and to become more adept at the world of the quest. The next few steps add a layer of controversy, perhaps, to the story. And they reflect, to some extent, maybe the sexism of storytelling. This is the way Campbell laid it out, but you could also invert it and play around with it. So step 2 of the initiation stage is called a meeting with the goddess. So this is a moment when the hero meets with a female figure of great power who inspires him and empowers him with strength and inspiration on his quest. An example of this might be Galadriel in Lord of the Rings. She is, after all, a character of immense power, and she gives them gifts, and from then on they often remember their time with her. Frequently the hero will think back to that vision of the goddess to help him through some of the hard times. In the old stories of knights in shining armor, they would often see maybe a vision of the Virgin Mary. The third step, even more complex, is the Temptress. And once again, this is usually a female figure that lures the hero off of the track. Instead of the purity and the inspiration of the goddess, the Temptress leads the hero astray. Now, in old stories, someone who tempts the hero off track is very frequently female, which again can be seen as kind of sexist. Why is it always the women that cause the problems? In more modern stories, sometimes the hero is actually a female to begin with, and the temptation doesn't have to be female. The one that comes obviously to mind is the Prince's Progress, the milkmaid with hair like snakes, who causes the hero prince to lie down for a day, ultimately delaying him enough to lead to disastrous results. But then we come to step 4 of the initiation, which is called Atonement with the Father. And it's a point at which our hero comes face to face with a father-like figure who restores him and returns him to his purpose. It sometimes happens at the same time as step 5. It often happens at the same time as the next step, which is called Apotheosis. Apotheosis is that deep breath right at the moment of final conflict. In fact, at this point, the hero usually dies. At least metaphorically. They've come face to face with the final conflict, and in that moment have perished. Sometimes literally, Harry Potter, sometimes more metaphorically, like Frodo passing out. And a great example of this is Harry Potter, spoilers. When Harry Potter is killed by Voldemort, who does he see? He sees his substitute father figure, which is Dumbledore. And so we have that atonement with the father at the same moment of apotheosis. Notice how this father figure is often the same as the mage figure from the beginning. Not always, but frequently. But our hero doesn't stay dead. No, our hero comes back and finishes that final conflict. Yay! And in doing so, we arrive at the final step of this initiation stage, which is the ultimate boon. A boon is a blessing, and so at this point the hero receives something that he truly needs. It could be something inside, like an understanding of himself, or it could be something physical, like a magic wand, or a treasure that will ultimately save his kingdom. And so we reach stage 3. Wait a second, have we already hit the climax? Yes, but our hero still has to return. The return stage also has 6 steps. The first step is called the refusal to return. This doesn't happen in every story, but frequently the hero doesn't really want to go back to the mundane world after experiencing the world of the quest. After all, here in the world of the quest, he's become a hero. Why would he want to go back to that old pathetic life when he was probably a loser? I mean, everyone knows that Luke Skywalker was kind of a whiny little wimp at the beginning of the story. And in fact, some stories don't end with the hero returning. The hero just stays. There are other variations, and we'll approach those as we get there. Step 2 of the return is magic flight. Oftentimes, the hero, after completing the final event, will need to get out of there fast, and will need to use some sort of power to escape from that final place of conflict, the inner sanctum. Whether it's the fact that at the last possible second, huge eagles swoop down and save you, or a magic carpet swoops in and saves you, or the Millennium Falcon swoops in and saves you. There's that sense of flying away. And this goes hand in hand with step 3, which is rescue from without. Usually the hero has given the last bit of his strength to that final conflict, and has often even sacrificed himself. I remember how he died in Apotheosis. And so in that moment of sacrifice, it looks like the hero will not return until someone swoops in and picks him up and carries him out. Again, the Eagles, Millennium Falcon, etc. Step 4 is the crossing of the return threshold. After being pulled out of that place of final conflict, the hero journeys home and has to step over the line to return into his place where he began. It's that same line he crossed when he was leaving. But it feels different now, because now he's a different person. And that leads us to the 5th step, which is the Master of Two Worlds. The hero returns to his home to discover not only did he become a hero in the world of the quest, but also now he's a hero in his home world. We can look and see how cool Luke is when he returns to fight off Jabba in Return of the Jedi. We see how changed and competent Frodo and Sam are as they return to their home, and in the book have to purge their home from evil. Or look at Stardust and how awesome Tristan is when he returns home. That's a great example of the quest story. And finally, the last step is the freedom to live. Now that the hero has become a hero, both in the world of the quest and in his home, he can choose the life he wants. He can become what he really should become, instead of being bound by insecurity and by his weakness. And sometimes he realizes that the things he thought he wanted at the beginning were not really what he wanted after all, and he finds what's truly best for him. Ah, the hero's journey. This format is easy to apply to so many stories, and in fact, it's a kind of way of looking at our own lives. We have to get up and step out of our comfort zones and face difficult things, but when we do, we grow, we become stronger. Sometimes we need help, but ultimately by pulling through, we can be better adept at making decisions and doing things that we want to do and becoming what we want to become, and about overcoming conflict. Thanks for watching. You can click to subscribe or watch another video, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.